Something a little different today for the One Simple Thing newsletter here. We've got a live interview. My friend Jeff Brown is with me from the Read to Lead podcast. Jeff, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
As you can tell by the name of the podcast, Read to Lead, I think it's all based on that old saying, isn't it?
It is. Leaders read and readers lead.
Yeah. How have you seen that to be true?
Well, for me, that process began back kind of in 2003 when I rediscovered reading. To me, reading used to be sort of a chore or homework when I was in school. I got done with school. It's like, oh, I don't have to do this anymore. But I was working at a radio station and had a great supervisor, a great boss who, really valued reading highly and brought books into the workplace, and we read business books together. And my eyes were opened to that world with a book called Purple Cow by Seth Godin. Yeah. And I realized what I'd been missing, and so I just read everything that I could get my hands on, and really saw my career trajectory sort of kick into high gear. And I attribute a lot of that with what I was learning, and then as it's not enough just to read it and fill your head with facts and knowledge and ideas. You have to actually start putting that into practice. Yeah. And as I began to do that, I began being viewed by those around me as a guy who knew what he was doing, a thought leader in various areas, and was asked to do more and more things along the way. And to me, it all goes back to that voracious reading that I was doing.
I know on the One Simple Thing podcast, I've interviewed people, and they talk about surrounding yourselves with a better quality of people.
Right,
it's that old Jim Rohn saying, you are the average of the 5 people you're closest to. And I think reading helps us do that in kind of a virtual way, doesn't it? It's not a person-to-person hangout, but you're learning from those people and you're absorbing their knowledge.
It's funny you mention that, because I was just thinking about that very thing this morning. A lot of people sort of throw their hands in the air and go, well, I've got a job, I've got family, I've got all these responsibilities. When am I going to find time to hang out with folks who are where I want to be? I think it starts, and it can be as simple as, turning that in-car time to, I think it was Zig Ziglar who used to call it Automobile University, and listen to audiobooks or listen to podcasts, and I began doing that around 2007. And along with the reading that I was doing, and those two things just went together hand in hand to, as I mentioned before, just really jettison me forward, I think, career-wise. And so, to me, those two things in combination are a great way to surround yourself, as you said, with those folks who you otherwise wouldn't have the chance to spend any time with.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So, somebody who's busy, they've got a family, they've got a job or whatever, where do they make the time? And obviously in the car you could listen to audiobooks, you could listen to podcasts or whatever, but I had a friend one time who was a big reader, and I said, well, I just don't have time. He goes, well, honestly, I probably am reading while you're watching TV, which was like, oh yeah, I guess so. So that's really, it's all comes down to kind of a choice of what we want to do, doesn't it?
Yeah, if you don't have time for it, but you do have time for things like that, then it's obviously not important enough to you to make time for. And I think that's a good example. I'm probably reading while you're watching TV. That's probably the case with most folks. It's a matter of finding those extra moments. For me, oftentimes it's leveraging that first hour or so of the day, or time within that first hour, when my wife's not up yet, the day isn't getting started. I'm not getting bombarded with emails and phone calls and that sort of thing. And so it's relatively quiet. I can go out on my deck in the back if the weather permits, and just jump into something and spend an hour uninterrupted in my favorite book or podcast or audiobook or what have you. So I really think you need to be intentional about it. You need to be consistent with it, and you'll be surprised, I think, at what it brings to you, what changes it makes in your life, because you'll be doing something, just by nature of doing it, you'll be doing something that 95% of people aren't doing, and that alone will separate you from most of the pack.
Well, if you're going to take advantage of the car time, and the, what would you call it, the car universe, Automobile University.
Yeah.
One of the good ways you could do that is the Read to Lead podcast, because you're interviewing a lot of these authors that you've probably read. Is that kind of weird to you? I know you interviewed Seth Godin a few weeks ago.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was sort of like the whole thing coming full circle.
Yeah.
Having his book, Purple Cow, be the kind of catalyst for me kind of going down this path, and then 13 or so years later to have him on my show, a podcast that you could argue he is single-handedly responsible for, if you want to look at it that way. It was just surreal, and it was a defining moment for me. I realized that after that episode, if I wanted to hang up the headphones, I could say I accomplished all I set out to accomplish. I've decided not to do that just yet.
Good.
But I felt like that was sort of kind of all of those things coming together all at once.
So the Read to Lead podcast, obviously it's authors of business-oriented books, correct?
Yeah, we talk about, obviously, leadership is a big part of what we talk about, or how these different facets of business affect leadership. So we'll talk about things like entrepreneurship, and this week's episode is an emphasis on marketing. We'll talk about career, we'll talk about personal development, productivity, business in general. So all those topics come into play, but by and large, it's how this impacts leadership. And again, going back to what we were saying earlier, I think that just by nature of the fact that you're reading, you're being intentional about it, you're being consistent with the business books that you're reading, all those things play into making you, I think, a better leader.
Well, we'll have a link right here in the video and also in the newsletter and on the website, so you can check out Jeff's podcast. Would highly recommend it. In fact, recently was nominated, let's see, you were nominated in the business category a couple of months ago. What was that? What awards was that? They just call it the Podcast Awards, the New Media Expo Podcast Awards. It was the 10th annual awards. Read to Lead was one of the 10 business podcasts nominated, and then there's a brand new awards ceremony. The Academy of Podcasters and Stitcher have joined forces to present a new awards as part of the second iteration of Podcast Movement in Fort Worth in late July, early August. And I'm one of 10 podcasts nominated in the business category for those awards. That's awesome.
I don't know how that stuff happens. I'm just glad that it does.
Well, I hope to one day be Jeff Brown. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for being here.